much for joining us here today. We're very privileged in many respects to be able to come to Cobh, but in particular we've got Joanna Murphy here, who's from the Cobh Harbour, who's come to extend a very warm welcome to us. And on behalf of the British Titanic Society, we thank you very much for making us so welcome into this port, which had significant connections with our interests, the RMS Titanic, and all those people who sailed on it. Many didn't come back. And part of our mission here is to remember those that died or lost friends and family in that disaster. But at the same time, we recognise that out of every disaster comes some good. And that good came in the form of the introduction of safety of life facilities on board ships that made certainly my life safer as a seafarer and all the passengers that we carried on board our ships. So without much more ado, I'm going to pass over to...
I'd like to introduce a very special guest here today. I was very fortunate enough to have some conversations locally. I thank Sonia at the Titanic Experience. And I'd like to welcome Deirdre O'Brien, who is a descendant of one of the passengers on board. We have a lot of descendants within the Titanic Society ourselves from all over the world, but mainly the UK. So it's fantastic to find someone who wants to come today from Ireland, and she's going to give a little bit of an idea of her story. I'm going to stop talking and she'll give away who her family are and what the story is.
Hi, how are you? So I live just across the water by coincidence. My name is Deirdre O'Brien, and roughly 110 years ago tomorrow, my grandfather and his brother Dennis journeyed from Cork. They were originally from Cobh down in West Cork, and they were my grandfather was the eldest, and my granduncle Dennis was the youngest of 7 children. And their 2 siblings, Michael and Margaret, were already over in America, so my great-grandparents saved up their money and bought the 2 steerage passenger tickets for the 2 of them. And for anybody who's watched the James Cameron Titanic movie, you'll know that a lot of the stories within that were actually taken from real life, because his researchers went all over America and spoke to descendants and so on and so forth. So in true Irish fashion, my grandfather and his brother, my great uncle, played poker on the quays, and just like the start of the Titanic movie, and my grandfather lost his ticket in the poker match, and his brother obviously didn't lose it. And we are one of the only families that can say in Ireland that we're grateful for gambling, because we wouldn't be here. So my grandfather, if you look at the original list of passengers, my grandfather is still listed as Bartholomew O'Brien, and they thought, my great-grandparents thought he had travelled, but he didn't. He was afraid to travel home because his parents would have murdered him because they'd say him. So he actually left and joined the British Navy and fought in World War I. So my great-uncle then went on, and he was a steerage passenger, Dennis, and sometimes his nickname, which was very common in Ireland many years ago, his nickname was Timothy. So some places you'll see him as Timothy, but he was very small. So I am tall, but most of my generation were quite small, and he was an amazing jockey. So he worked as a postal clerk in my great-grandparents' post office, which was quite wealthy, I suppose, back in Ireland then. They were fortunate that they were able to put food on the table, but they were being sent out. So he was going out to Boston to be a jockey for a quite wealthy American family who had spotted him in a national competition here. So he headed off. He was only 5'4", so he was very small and very light, and he wore a coat, which the story changes. Some of the stories say that his brother, my great-uncle Michael in America, sent the coat to him, but actually my great-grandmother bought the coat in Skibbereen. And as they did long ago when anyone was immigrating on the Titanic or whatever, she sewed her daughter's name, my great-aunt Margaret, who was called Maisie, her name into the label. And again, you'll see in the Titanic movie, James Cameron based the whole story of the jewel and the coat. That was all based on what's now famously called the Titanic coat. So we still have that coat in the family. So what happened was he gave the coat with a note to his brother and sister. The note, we don't know what it said, but the coat was given to somebody who boarded the lifeboat. And a lot of people don't know this part of the story. It's kind of in our family history. So when that lady landed in New York, she didn't immediately go to my great uncle and great aunt, because one of them was living in New York, and my great aunt, who my great uncle was going to, she lived in Boston. So she found the address on the lapel inside sewn in, which my great grandmother has put, and she travelled. It took 2 years for her to go to Boston, and she gave my great aunt Maisie the coat. And then, ironically, 40 years later, my own mother and my aunt left the same left the same country, and went to America to that very aunt, and they have the coat. So the coat is still in the family. So that was the story.
Thank you so much.
So hi everyone, my name is Joanna Murphy. I'm President of Cobh Noble Chamber, and I would really love to extend a very warm welcome to all of you from the British Titanic Society here to Cobh. We're so delighted to see you, and you are to be commended for keeping the memory of the Titanic alive and all who sailed. And when you look at the history of the Titanic, the fact that it was built in Belfast and she last docked here, she has had a huge impact on our town here from a tourism point of view. Because when people come here to Cobh, they're very interested in the story of the Titanic. And on a personal note, even my own children, I've got 3 boys, the time that they were very small, growing up the ladder, there was always Lego and the Titanic, painting the Titanic, the story of the Titanic. And to keep the memory alive is so amazing. And that's why we're so delighted that you've chosen to come to Cobh this year, and we really extend a warm welcome. Thank you. Thank you.